if somebody came up to you and said, Kris, I need to build a pipeline for my SaaS. I need to build this webinar. Would you say to them, build one webinar and here's how to grow it? Or would you say, do a series of webinars? Where do people start?
Great question. So, I mean, definitely start with one, like don't overthink it sometimes, just get one up. I think the number one thing I always tell people too is, how clear are you with your target market? Who is this for?
All right, here we are. We have Kris Sharma with us from webinargrow.com. If you are a SaaS company, you're looking to scale up your lead generation process, and you want somebody that actually understands what the heck webinars are, this is the man that you need to talk to. He's been around for years and years, and got to see an advanced copy of my book that's coming out later this year or sometime whenever this recording comes out. Kris, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making time out of your day to be here. Just before we decided to go live, we were talking about where the future of webinars are going. Like, we had this kind of, I felt like, golden age of webinars and online content during the early 2020s. And now here we are, kind of mid 23. Everything's quote unquote back to normal. But does that mean that we just throw everything out that we were doing during pandemic time, or is there still a place for the webinar? What's your opinion on this, sir?
Well, I'm definitely biased, but I do think there's definitely a place for it. Obviously, during the pandemic, there was a huge pop. I remember I just started to really narrow down, like, hey, I really, I was doing a lot of different growth marketing activities at the time. Like, I'm running Facebook ads, I'm doing this and that. I'm like, hey, why don't I just dial in and just do these webinars and customer acquisition? And the pandemic hit, and like, okay, perfect timing. Everything's closed down. What else are we going to do? We have to interact remotely. Obviously, that's not the case anymore, but I still think there's a place for webinars. I mean, if you imagine, like, okay, like I work with SaaS companies and they might have clients all over the world. Now, if I want to get people in person and I've got clients in Europe and Asia and Australia, well, that would cost a fortune, right? So, but it's much easier to book a time for an hour and someone can take an hour out of their day to check out the content you've got. So I think there's always going to be a place for that, particularly that live interaction. Another thing that's been popped up even, post-pandemic is now streaming in the B2B world, right? You see people streaming to LinkedIn or, their other channels, Twitter, even I'm seeing that. And it's essentially a webinar, right? It's all, what is it? It's just people talking. That's all it is. It's a modern version of someone on a phone line or someone, in a conference room somewhere. So I think that type of live experience is always going to have a place. It may take different forms. I also think now too, with social video in particular, you see like the Alex Hormozi quick cut type of videos. Webinars are a great way to repurpose that type of content. You repurpose that type of webinar content into social videos. So you're doing that one thing. I do this with all my clients, like, hey, we did this webinar. Let's squeeze as much out of it as we can. So it's a great way to not only generate content, but also to serve as a sounding board for more content that you're going to make.
So you're thinking about the webinar not just as a sales acquisition in the moment, like we get, 10 or 20 or 30 people onto a webinar, we try to sell them, we try to convert them into new customers. You're also thinking about it in terms of this can also be a content generation machine if you run your webinars correct. And I'm also latching on to this idea that you're talking about doing webinars live as opposed to maybe something like an evergreen webinar where you're recording it once and then you put it behind some sort of a click funnel. Are you finding that you're doing a lot of live webinars, like there's still demand for that, or is it starting to move towards that kind of on-demand view whenever you want kind of model?
There's still definitely demand for live, because there is that time sensitive thing where, hey, it's next week, sign up. I'm also in the B2B world. If I know, like on the info marketer side of things, the evergreen, the funniest are like the fake live ones where it's like, oh, it's starting in 5 minutes. Like, all right, sure, bro. So like, but I mean, in the B2B world, like there's like people are busy, but they will sign up for that type of thing. And I think as far as generating the content and also not necessarily needing to be a direct sale right there. because especially like if you, the more upmarket you go, the less likely that's going to happen, right? If it's an enterprise sale, it's like, it's literally impossible for someone to buy on the webinar. It's impossible. Like you have to have the financial buyer, you have to have the IT department, you have to have compliance. There's other steps, but it's a great way to establish trust and get that micro commitment where, hey, maybe it's scheduling a demo, maybe it's doing a free trial, maybe it's just asking for more information. So that's the way I like to position webinars is something that's that bridge between stranger and customer, right? Where it's like, sometimes they do buy right then, depending on the price point, like that's happened plenty of times, but the higher ticket your product is, you're probably going to need to do a sales call or discovery call anyway. And that's the nice thing too, is like when they're signing up for a live, like you can get a big push, like, hey, I'm going to email everybody, I'm going to run ads, boom, they all come in. But if it's, with Evergreen, unless you're running a ton of ads, you're not really going to get a significant pop on there that often. You might have something on your website where it's like, hey, sign up for this training. But it's like, in my feeling with the Evergreen stuff is like, and I know people push this a lot, but it's like, does it need to be this fake experience where it's, I can't pause, I can't rewind? Like, why? Do I need the fake chat? And I've been on people's webinars where I'm like, oh, this is actually great content, but I've got a phone call or I need to go get a coffee or something. It's like, oh, well, shit, I missed 10 minutes of this thing that wasn't live to begin with. So it's like that kind of, it's funny. It's like people, I know why people do it, because it's like, you want to lock them in and you're spent. And these people, I mean, I know some of these guys, they're spending thousands of dollars a day on traffic to do this, right? So it's like this, they need to convert, because it's like every sales call costs them $250. Right now, if it's a $5,000 course or something, sure, they can do that all day. But in the B2B world, it's like, it just, you don't need to have that kind of high pressure situation on your webinar. It's really about establishing your brand and making them solution aware at that point.
Right. And nurturing them kind of, it's interesting you make the distinction between the B2B and B2C as well, because that B2B, like I found that the B2B webinars can be a fantastic way, especially if that ticket size is really high, like a 5 or 6 figure, maybe even a 7-figure enterprise deal. Like that, the webinar can be such a good way to get people, to get those customers, potential customers, familiar with your business and get them comfortable with potentially doing business with you and giving them entree. I don't know. I think about the Evergreen webinars and go like, if it's recorded, just let me watch the damn recording. Like I hate those. I think people are sophisticated enough now that they can spot the fake live.
Oh yeah. And and the funny thing too is they some of those platforms can break down. Like what's his name? Dan Henry was talking about this a while back. He goes, I just switched to an embedded Wistia video, because if it comes in and it breaks, it's like, well, I'm completely screwed now. Like my credibility's lost. The people click away. And it's like, so it's like, that just cost me thousands of dollars, this one mistake, so it's like, I know, but yeah, it's just, it's unnecessarily complicated. And like, it was one of those things like, 10 years ago, oh my God, you could see people like, wow, this, I can't believe it. It's just in time. I just happened to get to this webinar, but like some of those tricks and hacks become so played out that it's like, instead of a hack, now it's a red flag. It's like, who's doing that anymore, right?
Yeah, it's just so obvious. It's like, we're not using just GoToMeeting anymore and running some cheesy slides and everybody's calling in. It's like, no. This is like, if you're going to make it pre-recorded and you're not going to take those questions, and I mean, this goes for virtual events too. Like I've seen so many virtual events where it's like, we're just going to, play out these videos. We're not taking questions from the audience. It's like, just make the content available so that I can watch it at my own leisure.
Yeah,
and like
100%.
it's okay if you're positioning that as a lead magnet. Like that's one thing, but just there's so much content out there now too.
So much. I mean, I think everyone's, technology's gotten better. People have gotten more hip to it. And, I think a lot of these, I mean, I see some of these people with this type of, how do I put this? A lot of these people are selling bullshit to idiots, right? Like if you see like a lot of this stuff in the web, like a lot of things are doing, it's like, let's be honest, you're selling to people that don't, I don't want to say stupid people, but like you're selling to people that don't know any better, right? You're selling some biz op. Oh, it's a turnkey Amazon FBA business. All you have to do, it's like, if it was that easy, you would never tell anyone. It's Forex trading. It just, you know what the market's doing. Like, if you knew what the market was doing, that would be worth unlimited money. That would be
Yeah.
worth $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, you know what the market's doing? Okay, well, just max out your credit cards. What do you, 100% interest rate? Who gives a shit? I'm going to make it back. Right. But they want, so they're selling something to people that are desperate. So like a lot of these tricks and psychological hacks, like they're for desperate people. Right. But in the B2B world, it's like, like you see the stuff people do on webinars, right? You see, so there's some of the things they do. I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but like, if you're ready to change your life, type yes in the chat, type I'm in. You're like, imagine doing that to a vice president at Cisco. Just, I want you to imagine, do you want to change your life? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about? Right? Like, if you don't act right now, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, people with actual money don't fall for shit like this. So, it's like, again, like, I think a lot of that, it's weird. It's all collapsed in it, right? Like, Nabil Aziz had a great post about how the entire coaching and all that, the whole industry is fueled by debt, right?
Oh.
It's like, it's all fueled by people that are maxing out their last $5,000 on their credit card in the hopes of changing their life with something, and they don't know what to do. And it's like, if they didn't have access to that debt, those entire industries would be gone, right? Because these people don't have actual money. They just have credit. But again, like in the B2B world, it's like, well, look, they're looking at ROI. They're looking at, hey, and not just, hey, is this going to work? But like, will this work with our setup? Like, we have processes, we have a tech stack, that spur of the moment sale doesn't always happen. So it's like, really, you just want to help build pipeline, right? Not to circle all the way back. It's like, now if it's a cheaper SaaS or something where it's like, hey, it's $50 a month. Yeah, go ahead and buy now. But if it's a $10,000 a year, $50,000 a year product, it's like, well, we have to talk to people, because even if I wanted to do it, I still need to check with so-and-so to make sure it'll work.
Right.
So, and I think it just comes down to a credibility thing, right?
Sure.
Like, with the way, like, okay, your webinars are fake. They're not live. Your product is probably bullshit. You're spending thousands of dollars on ad accounts that has probably been shut down in the past. You don't use your real name. How many of these people, it's like, you see their name and it's like, that's clearly your first name and your middle name. That's not your last name. Right. Oh, because are you a Hollywood actor? You need to have a stage name? No, because you don't want people Googling you to see that your last work history was that you were a barista 6 months ago, but now you're an e-com expert, right? Like, it's all that bullshit is all collapsed in on itself. And so, like, people, it's funny when they, like, even I see this sometimes where they're like, Kris, can you do the perfect webinar script? Can you do can you build me a funnel? And it's like, you have a real business. Like, you don't have to copy an info marketer when you have a real business.
Right. So I want to get onto the topic of the ideal B2B webinar. The ideal B2B webinar, what does it look like? And at what point, I guess I got two questions on that side. If you were if I was a Fortune 500 and I wanted to put together, maybe not a Fortune 500, other way around, I'm thinking ahead of myself here. I'm a SaaS, and maybe I'm at the level where I'm not like a $50 a month SaaS. I'm a SaaS where it's, maybe it's something like we integrate with a HubSpot kind of SaaS, or, where we do something with your CRM, or I think about the streaming world and go, we're a streaming platform, maybe pay as you go, but you could, if you lock in with us, you're potentially spending 4 or 5, maybe 6 figures per month with our platform. What does that, if you're building out a pipeline, if somebody came up to you and said, Kris, I need to build a pipeline for my SaaS, I need to build this webinar, would you say to them, build one webinar and here's how to grow it? Or would you say, do a series of webinars? Where do people start?
Great question. So, I mean, definitely start with one, like, don't overthink it sometimes, like, just get one up. I think the number one thing I always tell people too is, how clear are you with your target market? Who is this for? Because they'll say, can you write me a webinar? For who? Because everything I do depends on that. Tell me, get as granular as you can, because that informs everything, right? the industry, the company size, the role, the pain points, the tech stack they use, the competitors they're looking at. What are the transformations that they want? What are the pain points they're dealing with? So like with every customer I have, I probably spend the first week just deep diving into the target market, right? I want to know everything about them. I want to listen to sales calls. I want to listen to their demos. I want to see why people say no. I want to read reviews. I join Facebook group. I'm in so many Facebook groups of shit that I'm not part of. Like physical therapists and tax accountants and insurance agents. I just want to hear how they talk. I want to like understand the jargon, because really the number one thing is to, when you have that target market, you go to understand them and go, what problems are they trying to solve? Right? Because the big thing people always say is, well, how do I talk about my SaaS? No one cares about your SaaS. Literally no one. I want to tell them about my features. I'd rather do anything else. Right. But if I know the pain points, if I know, hey, like you want to build out a streaming service or whatever. Okay, well, what are the problems you're trying to solve? Okay, maybe it's latency issues. Maybe it's XYZ. Now I can start to build a webinar around this transformation. Right. So I always think with the person in mind first. Like, what are you trying to do? Oh, how can you save 10 hours a week? How can you, in this, I've done this with small SaaS, I've done this with enterprise, like it's the same process. And because the content needs to be relevant, right? The content, the hook is everything. I mean, I think sometimes the title is more important than the webinar itself. Sometimes, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, I care about this. Yeah, I want to learn that. And now when you have that webinar, right? It's like when I bring them in, I have the same 3 frameworks I use. They're all there, and even the 3, it's like all essentially one. But hey, we front load with great content, right? It's like, hey, and I give best practices. They're like, but you're not mentioning the SaaS. Like, I don't even mention your SaaS till 30 minutes in, bro. I don't do it. Like on the intro, I'll say, hey, this is our company. Hey, we're top rated on Capterra. We've worked with Disney and whoever, we do give them social proof. But then we go right into like best practices, things that even if you walked away right now, you would go, man, I'm so glad I learned that. I had no idea. Right. And then when you're giving these best practices, this is the chance to show your expertise, right? So you can share your customer stories, right? So I did one the other day for trade show event managers, right? Real life, a webinar for in-person events, right? And they, and I was like, oh, and I was like talking to the SaaS, and I'm like, hey, so I was just asking for stories, like, hey, what do you recommend? Blah blah blah, and I'm just writing stuff down. They're like, oh, that's Kris, that stuff's too elementary for our audience. They're going to know this. I'm like, just watch. And so they shared it, and people in the chat were like, oh my God, I had no idea. Really? I have to follow up with my leads right away? They had no idea. And I'm like, it's like, guys, you talk to 1,000 trade show marketers every day. They hardly ever talk to each other. You know what I mean? Like, things that are old hat for you are not old hat for your audience. So you give these best practices, the things that like, hey, I want to know this. That's genuinely good information. That's not just something like scraped off a blog somewhere, but real information. And then you start to show like, hey, this is how my SaaS fits into this, right? So it's like, hey, remember how we said you want to do X, Y, and Z? So here's X, here's Y, and Z. This is how we do it. Boom. So I click over here, and I'll do like a 5-10 minute demo, super fast, related to what I just talked about, right? So people are like, oh, that's so cool. And by the way, and then I just, right before we do the questions, softball pitch. Hey, if you're interested more, listen, I'll do what's called offer stacking, where it's like, hey, by the way, thanks so much for joining. Since you joined today, hey, we're going to get you this checklist on the best practices. We're going to, if you want to sign up for a demo, we'll give you a custom marketing analysis. We'll, if you do want a free trial, we'll give you white glove concierge onboarding, blah, 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 right? And then, so now it's like, I've done 3 things. Number 1 is I've established, I know what the fuck I'm talking about, and I can help you. Number 2 is I've shown that our software can help you, right? And you don't have to sit through a 30-minute boring demo. You just like, hey, this is cool. And number 3, I'm answering your questions, right? So then when some of the questions like, oh yeah, blah, blah. And I this happens so many times where like, hey, could you show that part of the demo again? And then 100 people or 200 people are like, oh yeah, I want to see that. So now it's like you're instead of one to many, instead of one to one, it's one to many, right? And the fun part when you do it like that is the demos become a million times easier, right? Because that's how I got started in this. I was selling SaaS, and I was, at the time, we were cold calling, literally like cold calling all day. I would lose my voice at the end of the month and couldn't work for a week. I'm like, I can't work any harder. I can't, you know what I mean? I was like, I can't do it anymore. It's like, can I just do a webinar? And I was like, if I got 10 people on a webinar, that's 10 demos instead of one. Well, I got 200 people on my first webinar. You know, it's like, it was life-changing, right? So it's like, if you can treat it like that, where it's still a real connection, and you're not like, you know what I mean? Like, if you were a salesperson, you're like, you got to buy right now. Do you want to change your life? Like, what are you talking? Like, you would get fired. Like, what are you talking about? So I think if you have that authenticity, you have the clear targeting, and you have a journey, right? That's the other thing too, is like, okay, when the webinar is over, most of the clients make most of their money after the webinar, right? Like, it's the follow-up emails, it's the repurposed content. I mean, I've had people sign up for sales calls with me, and I'm like, who the hell is this? He's like, oh man, I signed up for a webinar you did like 6 months ago. I didn't show up, but then I got one of your emails. I'm like, oh, cool, man. It's like, I have no idea who this person is. So like, that kind of thing is like, you create that warm list. Like, everything I do, cold email, webinars, content repurposing, so whatever, it's all to just build that engaged list and get them through. Because like, look, that buying pyramid, right? Who's that? Chet Holmes, one of those people. If you have the pyramid of buyers, 3% can buy right now, 7% maybe be convinced. Everybody else, like, it's just not the right time.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I'm not thinking about this. It's not important to me. But if you're nurturing them, they go, oh, that is pretty cool. Because like, this happened all the time when I sold SaaS. Was like, people like, oh, I love the product. I'm in a contract until next December. I literally can't buy. That's okay. We'll just keep nurturing. And then sure enough, January rolls around. Hey, I'm ready. That's what you want with a brand. It's like, you want that predictable revenue. And one of the ways to do that is to identify your audience and engage them. What's his name? There's this guy who is Jeff Spencer, I think his name is. He used to coach Olympic athletes, and he has this idea of soft, continuous pressure. Right. He's like, what you want is to have soft, continuous pressure on what you're doing. Right. So it's like, you're not pushing too hard, but it's just always there. And it's like, because that's what gets you the breakthroughs. Because like, if I overtrain an athlete, I do too much, they're going to get hurt. It's not going to, salesperson going to burn out the lead. Right. But if it's soft and continuous, it's money in the bank.
Right. So it's that, especially when you're in the B2B side, it's like, you're 100% right. You may not make that sale right then on the call. And my experience with my clients has been the same thing. Is like, many of my clients, they'll almost never make a sale right on the call then and there. But like 3, 6, 12 months down the line, like, yeah, they're starting to build up that pipeline. They're starting to build up that recurring, they're starting to build those relationships. Now, say you're building up a webinar, one of the things I've heard from some people is like, they go, oh, well, webinars are all great, but I'm starting from zero. I don't have a mailing list, or I don't have a customer list, or, maybe I've done my MVP and I've got a couple of initial customers, but like, I'm starting from scratch. What advice could you give them? The starting from scratch folks who are maybe new to the SaaS, their SaaS is relatively new. Where do they go? How would you suggest they start? Aside from, booking a call with you, and obviously you guys work together. And by the way, hint, hint.
Yeah. Write a check, and then here's my Stripe payment link. No, you gotta, if I were, anytime I give advice like this, I'm thinking like, okay, if I were starting my MVP, which is something I'm noodling around with now, you got to start again. Who are you targeting, right? Who's your target audience? And I still am a firm believer in cold outreach, right? Do your cold emails, do your LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be this massive scaled thing. Like, you could just manually do it if you have to, right? But you need to have those conversations, those one-to-one conversations, no matter what. And I always tell people too, like, before anyone signs up with me, it's like, do you have at least one channel that's working well? Because if you don't have one, it's a red flag. Get one channel. And again, it could be anything. Right? It could be Instagram DMs, it could be Facebook, it could be YouTube. It doesn't really matter, but you have one way to connect with your audience. And with, say if you want to do your first webinar, which, I don't think there's a downside to this at all. Like there's SaaS brands, the guys at Jasper AI, Dave and Austin, they launched their other product, Proof, with a webinar. And these guys are very experienced marketers. So it's like it was a no brainer for them. But, you can launch a product like that, but do you have the traffic? So I would say, if I'm B2B, I'm hitting up people on LinkedIn, I'm connecting with them, having conversations, you can do a LinkedIn event. It's free, right? Like you can stream right to LinkedIn. You can do it on Zoom or Demio or any of the webinar platforms. You can invite any of your contacts. There's no limit. So I'm doing this with a $50 million client right now, where I'm like, hey, by the way, can we get all your salespeople? I'm going to show them what to do. They're like, wow, I can invite all my connections. Like, yep, everyone's going to do it, right? You can totally do this. And so again, keep it cheap, do your outreach, and it doesn't, and the other thing too, is like, it doesn't have to be a home run, right? If you're brand new, I've got a couple customers. If you got 20 people on a webinar, is that not a win? Like I do webinars for myself once in a while, and it's like, I never have that hundreds of people on. I'm like, I couldn't, if I had 5 people sign up at the same time, I'd have to say no to 4 of them. Like I can only take on 1 client at a time until I get them ramped up, because the ramp up takes so long. So it's like right now, like talking to somebody that's like, yeah, we can get you started. We'll get started in July. Right. So again, like do the cheap traffic, do the things that don't scale, so that you can do the things that do scale. Because if you're before your first 100 users as a SaaS, it's like, you've got to be talking to people. You can't get around that. Everyone wants a magic bullet. Like, wouldn't it be cool if I cold emailed 10 million people and send them to an automated webinar and they just bought? I'm like, yeah, that would be cool. If that were a thing, everyone would do it. It's like, it's not a thing. Like you don't have the necessary, like you don't understand your target market. Your MVP is not there yet. Your pricing is not there. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah.
Well, you don't even have the staff to scale to meet that demand. Like, if you hit 10,000 people and you have, 10 people say yes, and you're scaling up and you've already got maybe 10 customers. Like, do you have the bandwidth to double your customers? Like, you sure about that?
Yeah, exactly. You sure about that? That meme. Yeah, no, for sure. And like, I mean, how I started when I was in sales doing my first webinars, I just cold emailed. I cold emailed people. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like, hey, I don't know if you're interested. We're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. And people started signing up. I'm like, oh, okay, right. It cost nothing. Like we had the servers and everything set up. So yeah, I would, if you're brand new like that, I would stay away from paid traffic and just get solid in one channel, wherever. And that really depends on your market. Wherever your market is, get as close to them as you can. I've seen people doing this on Twitter, like DMing people.
That's actually a really neat, I hadn't thought about that until just now for some reason. The idea of a lot of people are always looking for that angle of, oh, I want to hit them with a cold email. What do I hit them with? And there's always the classic, quick question, which and it still works. That subject line still works, man. But it's, but it's like, you're looking for some value proposition or something to offer them in that first email to kind of get that going. That inviting them to a webinar feels like such a low friction, high return effort. Would you consider doing a cold email campaign? I guess you just said, yeah, I consider doing a cold email campaign where it's like, hey, we're doing, I know my target market is interested in a low latency streaming service. That's important. The low latency, high quality is important to them. We're running a webinar on how to pull off a low latency, high quality stream happening, 20 days from now. Here's a sign up link if you're interested.
Oh yeah. That's how I started. That's literally what I did for the first couple of years. Because at the time I was like, I didn't know anything about paid traffic. I'm like, I don't know how to do Facebook ads. Like later I learned, but yeah, and again, like, especially those of you doing a cadence of like 4 or 5 emails, one of them could be to a live webinar. I'll send people to replays. Hey, I don't know if you'd be interested. I did a training on blah, blah, blah. Send them to the static page with the embedded Vimeo link and a button to book a demo. Hey, if you're interested, let them do their work. I don't even gate the content. I'm like, you can gate it if you want. But yeah, and the great thing too is like, if you do get them to sign up for the webinar, it's like, okay, you've now gotten a marketing qualified lead for $0. right? So it's like, if you did that at scale, it's like, I mean, and I had no idea how unusual that was till I started working with other companies, because I was like showing my case study. I'm like, yeah, this is what we did. It's like, I did this webinar. We got like 200 people. And then I turned it into an ebook. I thought that would be cool. And I did an email thing with that. And we got like 200 MQLs from that. They're like, well, Kris, how much did it cost? And I was like, I don't know, like $10, I think. And they're like, what? Like $10 a lead? I was like, no, like $10. I just needed to get a new email account. No, actually, no, we had one. No, it was zero. It was zero. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you got 500 leads for $0. I'm like, yeah, don't you? And I didn't realize till later, like, oh, these people would have spent $5,000 in ads to get that.
Right.
So,
and that would have been successful for them.
And would have been successful, you know? And I think it's one of those things that we like to overlook the simple things, because like we always think there's some hack or there's some next level thing, but it's like, if you're clear on your target market and you can help them and you've got a way to connect with them, like just provide value, right? Like you're providing value. And again, like get that same thing, that founder that's starting out, like get that warm email list, get them in, get them on the Beehive newsletter, get them on something, because it's like, I sign up for newsletters, or I read people's content. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. But like, I'm just not thinking about that product. But when I am, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to talk to Daniel about client ascension, or I'll talk to Jacob about growth partner program, or whomever, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I'm always like looking, but I'm like, it's just not top of mind for me. It's not a priority, right?
Sure.
Like, but when it is, I'm like, oh, I know who I'm going to talk to because they have credibility.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. It's always the simple stuff that works, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, people want complicated solutions because they haven't worked hard enough on the simple solution, right? If someone wants to lose weight, they're like, what's the supplement I need to take? And what's this? I'm like, I need you to go for a walk. I need you to go outside and walk 10,000 steps and not drink or eat sugar. Can you do that? But listen, I want to, listen, what kind of sleep mask should I wear? I need you to walk 10,000 steps. Right?
Yeah.
What vitamins walk 10,000 steps and then talk to me. Right. Cause it's like anything, there's a time and place for complexity, and myself included. We think about it too early. Even with my own business, I'm like, I have books on my bookshelf where I'm like, how to scale my company. It's like, I have like 3 contractors that I work with. I'm like, I don't need to, like, what am I talking? What am I doing? Right. So it's an insidious type of procrastination where you're looking at complex things rather than doubling down on the simple thing that works.
Right. Yeah. We're all guilty of that. So it's something to keep in mind. Is just keep it simple. I like the idea that I'm 100% with you. That idea of try simple stuff, try it. You know, it's like, okay, you get 5 people for your first webinar and maybe it's not a home run. Well, at least you've got content, and you look at that webinar critically and go, well, what worked, what didn't, what do we do for the next one? And just keep trying that, you know, try different topics until you find that it's all about product market fit, right?
Yeah. And it's a great way. The other cool thing with webinars too, is that, like those conversations you have with sales, you know, one-on-one sales calls, you're sort of having a conversation with hundreds of people in real time. If you have enough people on there, right? So when people are like, you start to see the patterns of what people are saying, like, what did they say when I did this, or why, you know, like you get that feedback much faster, right? Because now you pitched 100 people instead of 1. And again, like you can try different angles. Like I do this even when I like either running paid traffic or not, I'll split test topics. So if they showed up at a webinar page, like on Unbounce, it'll A/B test topics. I'm like, sometimes I don't even know, like it'll be like under a general topic, like, oh, it'll be about this, but the title, I have no idea. I'm like, I'm gonna adjust the content based on who, like, so if like, you know, the B version with this title has a 70% conversion rate, it's like, I'm gonna do the webinar about this. You know, like then the smart traffic will start funneling people there. So I'm like, I don't have to even be married to the content until the week of, right? Because like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, they sign up for increasing revenue, but this is actually about increasing revenue 20%. They feel they don't care. Right. Yeah. You know, so when they show, that's a fun thing too, is like you can let the wisdom of the crowd determine what you're doing. Right. Yeah. Like the people like, Kris, how did you come up with that topic? Like, I've never come up with a webinar topic in my life, ever. I just look at what people are saying and the things they want to learn about. And I'm like, great. And oh, another cool thing too is I do this all the time. It's my favorite type of webinar is I get like a customer that's a superstar, like that's just like, hey, who's killing it? Oh, Brian's killing it. Can I interview Brian on just what he does? You mean about the software? No, just what's Brian doing? Hey, you do XYZ. Oh yeah. And that's my very first webinar. I was interviewed one of the top insurance agents in America. And I just asked him, I was like, well, how did you get started? You know how popular that was? Like it was insanely popular because they wanted to learn from someone just like them. So he's given all these best practices. I don't know a damn thing about selling insurance, but I'm interviewing this guy. It's like, cool, yeah. And then I'm like just super softball, like, hey, how do you use the texting feature? How do you use this with the power dialer? How do you use it with X, Y, and Z? And then your customer is kind of demoing it for you. They're like, oh, I really like this. I don't use this that much. I like this over here. And like, it's the coolest thing because like, it's a content that no one else on earth has. It can become a case study. You got incredible social proof. And then people that are familiar with this person are like, oh my God, yeah, I want to sign up. I want to be like this person who's a winner. So if I could do one style of webinar for the rest of my life, it would be that kind of podcast style. I call it the customer win webinar, right. But it's essentially like a live podcast. It's like this, right? It's just a live interview, and people get scared. Like, Kris, what if the software breaks down? I'm like, well, that's on you, player. Like, maybe you should go better stuff. It's like maybe it will.
Time to go fix some bugs, man.
Time to get to work. But yeah. And that's a fun thing too, right? People are like, oh, webinars are dead. Are podcasts dead? I listen to podcasts all the time. So if you can treat your webinar like a podcast, like, hey, they might play it on their phone or might play it in the car. There's always going to be that need for getting better and that interesting, helpful content.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really underused trick is you get your best customer, you get your best case study. I remember doing this a long time ago and just going like, okay, these guys are doing so well with this. This was a home watch SaaS that I was involved with. It was solving the ultimate first world problem. You've got a property up in Canada and you've got a property down in Florida, and you spend half the year at each. And when you're not there at one of the properties, you need someone to watch over it. And so there's a whole industry called home watch, and home watch providers will go in and do the home watch reports and just make sure that everything's okay. And there's a company actually in Canada here that makes the world's leading home watch software. It's called Cridit, Qridit. They're a really awesome company, and like full disclosure, I've done work with them, so obviously I'm biased. But like they were doing the reason their SaaS was born was they were doing home watch and they needed a way to track their reports. And so they made a SaaS, and they found out there's other home watch companies. And so they started selling their own SaaS. So it's really cool.
Nice.
But what was also awesome was they recognized the power just kind of randomly of bringing on some of their strongest customers that were using their platform and just interviewing them on webinars. And it's there were webinars they did where they didn't even demo the product itself. They were just talking about, here are the advantages of what, here's the success story of, Kris and his home watch company. And, after they used this software, like their revenue increased 40%. And we would have case studies like that. It's like, we don't even need to demo anything. It's like we can funnel them to the tutorials if they want to see features.
Yeah, and really, like, it's funny when people are like, we want to demo software. I'm like, does anyone really care? As long as it works, because you know what I mean. Is UX good? Yeah, it's good. Okay. Does it work? Yeah. I love it. And there's no better ambassador for your company than a thrilled customer, right? Yeah. And because they get to share, and it's authentic. It's completely you. No one else can rip off that webinar. Right? No one else can do that. No one can do that content. No one can do the content about how this home watch brand did X, Y, Z. And they're so easy to do. Like I'll do this with consulting where like, I'll do the first couple of webinars and I'll train their team. I'm like, okay, this is how you do the interview. This is how we do the pre-interview. This is how we structure it out. This is what your slides are going to look like. They're like, that's it. I'm like, that's it. They're like, oh, wow. Okay. Like, it takes the pressure off. It's like, instead of spending 30 hours on a script, it's like, okay, you work on this for 3 hours,
Right.
maybe. Right. And I think I love that. And and you can do that with joint type of webinars too. If someone like a satisfied customer that like, oh, they use you and HubSpot, it's like, hey, HubSpot, this, I love that kind of stuff too, where it's like you get to cross-pollinate with, that's another thing for that solo founder. If your brand works really well with something else, see what you can do for a joint webinar. That's incredible free traffic, right? You're sending some of their people over there, they're sending people to you. And people are like, well, a big company won't want to do that. I'm like, I've done webinars with Slack and app queues and a million. They have jobs to do too, and they have KPIs they need to hit. They'll talk to you if you're solving a problem. So
you'd be amazed what I'm with you on that one. Like we did webinars with Dolby, and like it part of that came up just because like we were using their platform to power some of our live streams. And they're like,
nice.
wow, you guys are doing some really cool hybrid and virtual stuff. You want to host a webinar for us? And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so it was really cool to be able to host a webinar with them. They funneled some traffic to us. We funneled traffic to them. And also being able for them to kind of hold us up on a platform and say, hey, look at our customer having we're hosting a webinar using our customer's platform, but our customer's platform is powered by Dolby. How cool is that?
That's
and
really
so it was
cool.
a win for everybody in the room.
I love it. I think you get to, you have your ideal customers, and that ideal tech stack is like, oh man, winners use Dolby, winners use, X, Y, and Z. And these are just go so well together. It's like, that's a partnership that can last forever. Right.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of, And that's the other cool thing too, is like being able to do long-term, you get that snowball effect, right? Like, oh, they did, the Dolby people, some signed up for the webinar, some of them signed up for Dolby, and they're thrilled because like, oh wow, we got 500 people from this other this other channel. That's so cool. I love it.
And the results that you can get too from webinars, like I had one client, they ended up calling us in to help produce their webinar because they went from having 200 signups on their webinar to like 1,500 in the span of a day and a half. Like they actually had to upgrade their Zoom license twice because we were just running out of space for like, I think we had 2,200 signups by the time show day rolled around.
Killer.
And so they were like, okay, well, we can't just have the 2 lecturers that we were going to have on this webinar just sit at their laptops. That's going to look kind of bad. So they ended up calling us in. We turned their, second floor into a TV studio. It was hilarious. But I was talking with them a couple days ago and asked them like, so how did that webinar go? Like, what'd that do for you guys? And they said, we launched an entire new product line, and and this was a webinar we did in March. 10% of all of their leads, all of their closed won sales have come from that webinar.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, okay, well, that was money well spent.
Yeah. Can't beat that. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Love it.
So it's, I think that we open this with a question about, are webinars dead? Are we just back to, good old press the flesh and go to the trade show and meet everyone that you can and hand out the business cards? And it sounds like there's still a place for all this.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely, and there's, there's place for webinar, and there's place for in-person as well. Right. Like I love doing in-person stuff as well. Like it's one of those things that there doesn't have to be a dichotomy. It doesn't have to be an either or. If you're doing an in-person event, like, well, you should maybe make it virtual too. Why not? Like it's the incremental cost would be outweighed by the potential global audience for it. And, vice versa. If you're always virtual, it's like, well, is there anything you can do? Are there any, because another cool thing I've seen with in-person type of trade show stuff is doing webinars before trade shows. Right. So like warm them up and like, so, hey, if you want to stop by the booth, like, I know I'm going to see you in Vegas next week, but hey, we're doing this webinar. Like, oh, cool. Like, so now you're not one of 1,000 booths out there, but now you're one of 10 that they've heard of. Like, oh yeah, I need to stop by them because that was really cool.
Right. And you've booked 1 million appointments. You've booked your calendar solid before you've even set foot on the trade show.
Yeah. That's the best, right? It's like, you're not sitting there like a jerk, like, will you come by my booth? It's like, no, we're booked
Yeah.
I love it.
That's what you want. Well, we should probably wrap things up. If you
Great.
had to leave, if you had to leave us with one thought about webinars, about events in general, what would it be?
Just do one. Just get started and do one. Don't overthink it. You know, if it's something that's, you know, interesting to you, don't lose time, right? Because it's like an imperfect webinar today is better than a perfect webinar 2 years from now, right? Because it's like that use that time to get better rather than waiting.
Right. So go do it is what
Go
you're
do
saying.
it. Go do it.
Go do it. I feel like I need to organize like 20 webinars. Considering I've got a book coming out, I should probably get something together for that, right?
Right? Pre-launch, baby.
Yeah, exactly. So awesome. So, and if people want to find out more about what you do and put together a webinar that kicks ass and converts prospects into customers, they can find you at webinargrow.com.
That's it. Yeah. Or you can always hit me up on LinkedIn, Kris Sharma. You hit me up there, or webinargrow.com.
Sharma, Sharma, not shawarma,
Yep.
which
Not
autocorrect
shawarma.
wanted me to spell it as shawarma. And I'm like, no, I don't
Delicious.
think it. Kris makes delicious webinars out of shawarma. Love it. Dude, thank you so much for coming on today. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, man. This was a blast.
And we will talk again sometime soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely, brother.
Check out Kris, webinargrow.com. He's got lots of good stuff posted there. We'll talk to you again next time whenever we decide to stream again. Cheers.
See you, Rick.